Hello ladies and gentlemen, friendos and friendettes across the internetscape, this is your friendly neighborhood Omega of Team DawnLight, and today I thought I'd do a little bit of a comparison piece between Starbound and Terraria. Two games of a very similar cloth, but at the same time, very different. So, as some of you may or may not be aware, Starbound and Terraria are both a sort of Metroidvania-style games that are 2D, sprite-based, and allow you to explore environments, mine resources, craft, fight bosses, fight enemies, etc. And they came out within fairly reasonable time spans of each other. Starbound came out only about a year ago. Terraria, rather, came out about 2 years ago or so. And their striking similarities between the two of them led many to believe that Starbound is a clone of Terraria, and I would argue in favor of that. But it has improved upon and changed the design that Terraria has to the point where it's hard to say whether or not it's even a clone anymore. A lot of the mechanics have changed, a lot of the actual way the worlds work have changed, and the general emphasis on the different components of the game have definitely changed between the two games. So, Starbound, compared to Terraria, has a very, very, very heavy emphasis on mining. It is what you will be doing for the majority of the game to get pretty much all of your gear. There is no real tier of gear or style of weapon that you cannot get through mining. You basically have to mine to find everything you need to be able to craft your armor, craft your weapons, craft your accessories, and etc. Whereas in Terraria, that is what you have to do in the beginning stages, and then later once you kill the first bosses and the Wall of Flesh, and you advance into hardcore mode, it's what you need to do to craft the later armor and weapons as well. But the bosses tend to drop better rewards, I would say. They tend to drop weapons, they tend to drop armor pieces that you can't otherwise craft, and overall, there are more ways than one of getting gear in Terraria. Starbound is much more limited in that regard. Starbound, you can get random drops off of enemies, but the bosses generally don't drop anything for you. Generally, the bosses will drop items that will allow you to build a star map upgrade, which will allow you to advance to a different sector of the galaxy. Now, basically that means it lets your ship go further so you can find higher level planets and find new crafting resources. But they don't drop weapons. And as a result, killing the bosses is much less satisfying, and mining is a whole lot more boring, because it's what you'll end up doing for the majority of the time that you're playing the game. And it's not fun. Mining is never fun. Even in Minecraft, it's just not fun to mine. No one likes mining. It's a tedious chore. People did it for menial labor in the mid-20th century for a reason, because it's not fun. It's not exciting. It's boring. It's boring. So, when the majority of your game is centered around mining to craft stuff to go on to mine, it gets a little bit boring. And I would say that Terraria is guilty of this as well. But the problem is that Starbound has a progression system where you have to create a certain set of gear and weapons out of a certain type of ore to advance to the next planet, which will let you craft better versions of those weapons and armor, usually off of the same kind of ore mixed with a different ingredient, and so on, until you get to the level where you can fight the boss. Now, the problem is that there are 10 tiers of crafting resources in Starbound, and it takes about 3 to get to a boss fight, if that. Sometimes only 2. And that's not to say you can't do them with less, you certainly can, but to really prep yourself for the boss fights that you'll face in Starbound, you have to get the right tier of gear in order to fight them. And that requires going through multiple different planets, harvesting ore, moving on, harvesting ore, moving on, harvesting ore, harvesting more ore so you can harvest the ore that you harvested, then you harvest the ore. You just keep harvesting the ore non-stop. You see ore, you take it. It's like, here you go, here's ore. Do you want ore? No, I don't want ore. But you gotta take the ore in order to keep going. And it's so annoying. I put about 26 hours into the game. I'm not gonna lie. It's a fun game. I will also not lie about that. But the fact that I spent so much of those 26 hours mining resources to move on to the next planet to mine more resources is very irksome. Terraria doesn't really carry that much of a problem. Or rather, doesn't carry that problem to that sort of extent. You do have to mine resources in order to upgrade your gear in the initial phases, yeah. But you don't have to. It's not as required as it is in Starbound, because in Starbound you will be destroyed if you do not have the right tier of armor. And I'm talking 2 hits destroyed. I'm talking 1 hit destroyed. And there are creatures all over in Starbound in much greater abundance than there are in Terraria. So when you put that into perspective, you have to constantly be mining ore and getting new ore to put... it's just so terrible. It's very annoying. And if they do fix it at a later point, because Starbound is technically, I guess, an early access game, I guess it'd be a beta, they really need to fix that, please. The other gripes I have are with the bosses. The bosses in Terraria are good. The bosses in Starbound are... Some of the bosses in Starbound are challenging, such as the skeletal dragon that you'll end up facing. Or is it the undead dragon? I could be wrong. I'll correct it in editing. But for the most part, they're very easy to kill, and they don't really challenge you, not like the bosses do in Terraria. You remember Plantera? There ain't no Plantera in Starbound. You remember the Wall of Flesh? Ain't no Wall of Flesh in Starbound. And, of course, because we go back to the progression system with the ores, it's very easy to outpace the damage that these bosses can put out, and just get the right kind of ore so that you can kill them very easily. And what's worse is that in Terraria, there was a notable progression curve with how you killed the bosses. You had to kill a boss to get to the next boss, to get to the next boss, to eventually get to hardcore. And while Starbound does do that, Starbound does have a progression system to its bosses, it's not very tempting, let me say. Because your incentive for killing bosses is get more ore so you can kill more bosses, so you can get more ore, so you can get more ore. Let me put it this way. The game doesn't really have an endgame except to mine the best kind of ore, and that's it. And worse off, the ore is incredibly easy to get, so you'll be done with the game in maybe not 26 hours. I did that because I was goofing around a lot. It's very annoying when you have to think about all you have to look forward to in killing a boss is to go mine more ore. At least in Terraria, when you kill the Destroyer of Worlds, or I suppose it's the Eater of Worlds on normal difficulty, you can look forward to the fact that you can now get Demonite so that you can mine down and destroy the Shadow Orbs. If you don't know what I'm talking, then go read the wiki. And those Shadow Orbs will usually give you gear to fight new bosses. You always have that to look forward to. Not to mention the fact that after you destroy the Eater of Worlds the first time, you have the equipment to more easily defeat it the next time, and you can farm it as a result to get better and better gear, to a cap. Starbound, again, doesn't really do that because the bosses will only drop items that allow you to craft the materials necessary to advance to the next sector. That's boring. It's terrible. It's annoying, and there's no incentive to killing the bosses. I never feel encouraged to put myself through some effort to kill the bosses. The undead dragon, for example, I cheated my way through that boss. I didn't literally cheat, but I used a strategy that might as well have been considered cheating, because I just didn't care. I didn't care about fighting the boss. I didn't care that it was challenging. I cared about the fact that I was taking so many hits, I couldn't deal with it because I didn't have the right kind of ore, and I couldn't find the right kind of ore, so I just had to deal with what I had to deal with. And moreover, Starbound has such a dearth of weapons compared to Terraria that you're going to be stuck with generally what you can craft. You can go find dungeons on other planets, but raiding them takes a while, and it's not guaranteed you'll find what you need or anything good. So that's a problem. And speaking of the weapons, Starbound does have weapons. There are a decent variety of them. But again, like I said before, you're going to be stuck mostly to what you're crafting with unless you get a rare drop off of something like a dungeon. And while those are in abundance, it's very rare for you to get something decent out of them, i.e. something you couldn't, outpace with crafting. And as a result, there's not a lot of incentive to going in there either, except to maybe try for the chance that you'll get some epic item that does umpteenth bazillion amount of damage and to this mob so you can kill the boss so you can go mine more ore. Oh, it's so much fun. But I suppose I'm ragging on Starbound a little bit too much, so let me go into some things that are good about Starbound. You got multiple races in Starbound. It's an interesting dynamic, and it doesn't really play in until you start actually making sets of armor. Each race has a unique skill set which applies when it has its full set of armor applied to it. Now basically that's a full set of steel armor, a full set of iron armor, a full set of rubidium armor. It will have some effect, and it depends on the race, like, the Hyodal can breathe underwater and move faster when you have their full set equipped. Or the avian race, I cannot remember their name, can glide when you have their full set equipped. They're nice little skill sets, and I think they could have just made multiple races that didn't do anything different from each other except for aesthetic reasons. But the fact that they put in those tiny little skill differences is a nice touch. I appreciate it. I think they could have gone further with it and added more race-specific skills, maybe smaller things, but they could have definitely added something, as maybe something that you can stick on the toolbar, because as it is, you can already get little modifier things that allow you to, say, double jump or glide or something of that nature, which are also a very nice feature, I might add. I do not recall what they're called. They're little tech pieces that you can upgrade yourself with that basically give you new powers. And you can equip about 4 of them at a time, I believe. They're all very nice, and they do add a little bit of flair to the game. I think there could be more of them, and I think they could be maybe a little bit easier to get. As it stands, you have to go into a tech lab, which is a rare dungeon spawn, and find one. And again, they're rare to find in even that circumstance, which is a problem. So, let's go on to what makes Starbound really unique, the ship. Now, the ship in Starbound is sort of your hub for going between different worlds, and it's also where most people store their crafting resources, their chests and whatnot, because, you know, if you leave stuff on a planet and you leave the planet, well, then you're gonna have to go back and find that planet again, and you can't just mark it on your star map. So, the ship is nice for storage and crafting purposes, but and this is a nitpicky thing, I will acknowledge. This is a gripe that really I don't need to have, but it's a quality of life concern. I want to just edit the ship. I want to put stuff on the ship. I want to make it bigger. I want to make it badder. I want to make it more powerful. I want to put weapon systems on it. I don't care. I want to put an orbital bombardment device if I want to. And you can't edit the ship except for the interior. And even then you can't take out the structural supports. I know that's really nitpicking, but I really, really want to edit that ship so much. Each race has an individual ship, and I could just see all the creative things that would come out of that if you let your characters just be creative and build onto their ships as much as they wanted. Maybe even put some form of ship combat in, just as a little aside. Something for people to do if they get bored. Now, another thing to mention is the difficulty scaling. This varies between the two, both Starbound and Terraria. Terraria has a two difficulty scaling system, more or less. It basically has the starting difficulty you pick for it, and hardcore, which unlocks after you kill the wall of flesh. Hardcore is basically what it says on the tin. It's hardcore. It's all the bosses are ramped up, all the enemies are ramped up, the corruption and something called the hollow, which is basically the anti-corruption, it's the antithesis, will grow exponentially across the plains, and they will start spawning enemies that are really hard to kill. New events will open up, bosses will basically become souped up, mechanized versions of themselves, and they'll give better loot. And it's not for the faint of heart. It can be difficult and daunting at first, but it really becomes worth it once you get into the later stages of hardcore and Terraria. Now, Starbound doesn't do that. Starbound does change based on the difficulty that you're at, based on what bosses you kill, rather. Because there are 10 tiers of planets that you can go to, each more difficult than the last. And it's nice because you get an idea of what you're going to be facing on each individual planet, but like I said before, with the way that armor and weapons and ore works, you have to go to a higher level planet than what you are in order to get the resources to be able to sustain yourself on that planet, so it becomes a catch-22. You die pretty fast, and you end up having to die a lot to get the resources you need. And overall, I don't really think I like it. Not insofar as, it's a scaling difficulty system based on boss kills and based on different planets, leveling 1 to 10. I don't care about that. The fact is that, at the end of the day, the only thing I have to strive for when I kill bosses and I advance to the next level of difficulty is enemies that hit me harder, take more hits, and that block my access to better ores. That's not what Terraria Hardcore is. Terraria Hardcore basically puts you up against things that are bigger and badder than you, gives you a fighting chance, but makes it very difficult for you to beat them. Starbound just makes it really hard to beat them in the beginning with a sheer cliff face of difficulty, and then it makes everything else negligible after you get the ores. You can just get the ores off of a planet and leave. You don't even have to fight what's on it. It's annoying, to say the least, to think that you fought all that way to get to harder creatures that don't drop anything except money. Oh, that's great. That's the other thing I should mention. Whereas mobs generally drop stuff in Terraria, when you find random mobs on the surface in Starbound, they generally will not drop anything, and if they do, it's nothing of worth, except for the occasional rare weapon which you might come across. I did twice. It makes the enemies very trivial, very annoying, and it just makes them not worth your time to have to kill. They're nuisances at that point. And while some enemies become nuisances in Terraria, at least they have some kind of value later in the game. You know, the eyeballs you need for lenses, you still need slimes for gel because eventually you're going to run out of torches. Even the enemies you find in surface biomes, say like the jungle, have resources that you will eventually need to craft materials. And in Starbound, well, they drop pixels, which is money. And that money is basically used to craft other stuff. And while that is necessary, I'd prefer they at least maybe drop something else for my shrubbles. Please, maybe, be nice to me. On a final note, quests. Now, Starbound opens up with quests, and Starbound has about, I think, 10 quests or so. Leads you up to the first boss fight, which will get you out of the first sector. They are a vast improvement over the way that Terraria does things. I will wholeheartedly admit. I think so, anyway. The way that Terraria basically explains the game to you is go read the wiki, go read the wiki, go read the wiki, and maybe you will survive. Terraria presents you with the wiki and says, here, you idiot, read the wiki, because we're not going to tell you how to do anything. You can mine resources until your heart goes kaput. You're not going to get anywhere unless you read the wiki. You're not going to know how to fight the bosses. And while that does lend a certain sense of challenge to the game, because you have to basically figure out everything by yourself, unless you're using the wiki like most people do, it's not fun that way. Now, Starbound links you directly to the wiki. It does. But Starbound's initial quest basically explained the core mechanics of the game, which is really nice. And it gives you an objective. Kill the first boss. Terraria doesn't explain how to kill the first boss. Terraria doesn't even tell you what the first boss is. You could go walk up and fight Skeletron and you think that's the first boss. So, the structured system that Starbound has is very nice. The problem is that after you beat the first boss of the game and advance to the next sector, it just stops. Starbound stops giving you quests, stops telling you what to do. And I think I get what they're trying to do. One of two things happened. Either the team didn't want to make any more quests because they thought that the player by then would get everything that they needed to do and would know how to advance for the rest of the game, and generally that's true. But the other option is that they were just lazy and didn't program any quests for the later stages of difficulty or for the rest of the bosses. Also a possibility. You know, if they did that, it's up to them really. I think more quests would be nice though. Here's why. And this is something I felt personally, once you kill the first boss and you just have no quests, it feels kinda weird. Because the game had been telling you what you needed to do. It had been giving you a clear path that you can move down up until that point. After you kill the first boss and there's no more quests and the game just leaves you by yourself, it's a bit of a jarring situation to be in, because then you're just like, okay, quest, what do I do now? And the quest, there's no more quests. So you basically have to figure out by yourself that you need to go put the star map upgrade in, you need to take your ship, you need to get away from the planet, and you need to go venture to other planets. Now, the problem with this is the game doesn't really guide you. It doesn't say, you know, go to tier 3 planet, go to tier 2 planet, collect this resources to be able to defeat this boss. You might want to learn this mechanic. What are these dungeon things? Have you ever heard of these? Maybe we'll give you a quest to go in there. I know that's not wholly necessary to be able to teach people how to play the game, but I had the wiki up for the majority of this game when I was playing it, simply because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where to go, I didn't know what these dungeon things were, I don't know where they went, I don't know what ore is located where, I don't know why I'm dying on asteroids, I don't know why I'm dying on cold planets, I don't know what to get to solve the dying problem on the cold planets. There are environmental hazards in the game, and the game doesn't tell you how to deal with them. There are ways to deal with them, but the game doesn't innately tell you how to deal with them. You basically have to stumble around until you find the answer. And by stumble around, I mean you mine resources until you find the anvil that basically shows you a new recipe that says, oh here idiot, build this, it's very nice, it's good, take this, you might need it, you're just dangerous to go alone. So, I think it needs more quests. I think Terraria would have highly benefited from having quests because Terraria just throws so much information at you and expects you to understand it, and it's kind of hard to, at least most of the time. So that's the gist of the argument I have of Starbound versus Terraria. Are they good? Yes, in their own rights. Is Starbound bad? Not really, but it has its faults. Should you play any one of them over the other? That's down to personal opinion. Mostly this was just a commentary piece because I felt I should address some things about it, even though I might be behind on the curve a little bit, especially with Pixel Pirates coming out and this argument basically being invalidated because whoever made Terraria, I forget their name, made a better game. But I thought people would be interested in it. Maybe you would get to see the side of Starbound that you perhaps didn't see in any other video, or maybe you considered buying Starbound on early access and were a little bit hesitant to do so, words, because it looked like a Terraria clone. Which it is, by the way, I'm not gonna lie and say it's not. So hopefully you feel a little bit more informed, and of course my name has been Omega. If you like this video, remember to like, comment, favorite it, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And of course pop over to the subreddit at some time because occasionally we wanted that, and follow us on Twitter. I'll see you next time.